confounding some of the skeptics. The federal government has indicted former FBI Director Jim Comey on 2 charges, an obstruction of justice charge and a perjury charge. The indictment alleges Comey obstructed a congressional investigation into the disclosure of sensitive information in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1505. The indictment also alleges Comey made a false statement in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1001, stated he did not authorize someone at the FBI to be an anonymous source. And according to the indictment, that statement was false. This gave Pam Bondi and Kash Patel the opportunity to invoke an oft-favored phrase of the left when it came to President Trump and the indictments that were rendered against him. No one is above the law. Indeed. FBI Director Kash Patel, today your FBI took another step in its promise of full accountability. For far too long, previous corrupt leadership and their enablers weaponized for federal law enforcement, damaging once proud institutions and severely eroding public trust. Every day we continue the fight to earn that trust back. And under my leadership, this FBI will confront the problem head on. Well, Comey is looking forward to it. He is, of course, attempting to hi-hat the Trump administration, the federal government. He is a courageous victim who fought the fight knowing the potential dangers of doing so, knowing the perils of crossing Trump. But he wouldn't do it any other way because he's a man that who would rather die standing up than live on his knees. He cuts an impressive figure, doesn't he?
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Let's have a trial. And by the way, fear is the tool of the tyrant. I'm not familiar with that Taylor Swift song. I assume it's Taylor Swift because I know that's his intellectual North Star. The issue on the perjury is pretty straightforward. It's this testimony that he gave in September of 2020 before the Senate Judiciary Committee, reiterating what he had testified to in May of 2017. May of 2017 testimony, statute of limitations has run. September 30th, 2020 testimony, statute of limitations has not yet run.
On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? You responded under oath, quote, never. He then asked you, quote, have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration? You responded again under oath, no. Now, as you know, Mr. McCabe, who works for you, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal and that you were directly aware of it and that you directly authorized it. Now, what Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
So your testimony is you've never authorized anyone to leak. And Mr. McCabe, if he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
Well, it's not just Andy McCabe versus Jim Comey on this. Something that Ted Cruz probably didn't know at the time, or certainly didn't have evidence of at the time, back in 2020, that came to light just last month when Kash Patel declassified documents related to Jim Comey's assertions. And we find that Columbia University law professor Daniel Richman admitted to FBI agents in interviews that he routinely communicated on behalf of Comey, his longtime friend, with New York Times reporter Michael Schmidt, whose work was among the newspaper's 2018 Pulitzer Prize-winning stories on Russian election interference. The goal, Richmond told the FBI, was, quote, to correct stories critical of Comey, the FBI, and to shape future press coverage, unquote, outside of the Bureau's official press office, according to internal FBI memos that current director Kash Patel delivered to Congress this week. This is from a story by John Solomon last month. Richmond insisted he did not believe he had confirmed or provided classified intelligence to reporters, but said he couldn't be 100%, noting he can only make his leak denial with a discount. That's according to the memo again. So his good friend, Columbia University law professor Daniel Richman, told the FBI that in point of fact, Comey was leaking information to him to leak to the New York Times for the purposes of, quoting Richman again, to correct stories critical of Comey and the FBI and to shape future press coverage. He also, it was indicated by Richman, wanted to goad the Department of Justice into appointing a special prosecutor to go after President Trump. So, yeah, that's, I think, black letter perjury, his testimony versus what Daniel Richman told the FBI. Now, so it's not just Andy McCabe. For more on the matter, pleased to be joined again by Professor Richard Epstein, James Parker Hall, Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of Law, and Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago. Professor Epstein, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, but I'm not overjoyed to have to comment on this particular case.
Well, okay, you don't have to be joyful about it, but you have to comment. So what do you think about the indictment?
Well, I mean, the indictment itself is much less persuasive than the account that you just gave. In fact, it's a very thin indictment, which just talks about this in complete generalities, and the stuff that you've given is much more powerful because what it does do is it adds specificity to an indictment which has no names, no details, and no accounts. And I think that Comey has always been a man who's walked both sides of this line and has earned the wrath not only of the Republicans like Trump, but also the Democrats because of the way in which he treated Hillary Clinton. And I mean, so this is a man whom I knew as a law school when I was in law school, and so was as a stand-up guy. But what happens is when you get into politics like this, and you're desperate to keep your particular job, and it turns out that everybody's coming in from left and right, you panic and you start doing things that probably you shouldn't regret. Now, the interesting thing is, what about the administration? Because there are two doctrines at stake in here. One is, did he commit the perjury? And this testimony seems, until rebutted, to be fairly persuasive. But then the question is, do you want to bring this case at all? And my own view about this generally is I don't like seeing criminal indictments coming out of political squabbles. This is exactly the same thing that happened to Ted Olson, if you remember, way back when he made some testimony to the Senate, which was found to be false, and he was subjected to a special prosecutor in a case that turned out to last forever. A very bad kind of precedent. And what Trump has done here is he's fired a local district attorney who thought the evidence was insufficient to bring a criminal charge, which could easily mean he said, I think it was more likely true than not, but I couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And so what he did is he got rid of that person, put in his own hand-chosen person to prosecute the particular case. And what that does is it gives rise to another institutional issue, which is every bit as important. How independent is the Justice Department when it comes to the operation of its criminal law prosecution?
Yeah.
And the traditional view has been always you keep them highly independent. And in this particular case, it's quite clear that they're not.
Well, I mean, here's the thing on that, if I could interrupt. I mean, so I get the optics of this don't look good. He removes the U.S. attorney or effectively does, the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, and he installs someone that was a former counsel to him, and then the indictment happens. But the subtext of that is there appears to be, again, this is just based on reporting, I don't know firsthand, there appeared to be an argument that was raging within the U.S. Attorney's Office under the former U.S. Attorney as to whether or not there was an action, there was evidence here that would substantiate a case against Comey that would make it make sense to pursue this case. So there were people that were similarly situated making arguments in both directions, which is not unusual. And I'm sure politics played a role with some, but you still had people that sort of equal credential that were making the case in both directions. And now you had a U.S. attorney that apparently agrees with the president that Jim Comey should be prosecuted, and that's happening. So again, I don't like the optics either, but by the same token, in terms of the underlying substance of it, just based on what I provided there, that's in the public domain on him perjuring himself, I mean, it's a credible case.
Well, I mean, so the problem in many of these cases is the one that I've always had to drop. Do you really want to bring credible cases against your political enemies, when in fact what it does is has all sorts of collateral consequences about the way in which you look at things? And remember, this is not the only time he's tried to pressure people. Danielle says so, and she just resigned rather than make the deal with respect to Eric Adams and so forth. And what's happened is, he's now got another hit list of all sorts of other people he wants. And so you're left with the really terrible kind of sensation that a president who's egregiously wrong in all sorts of other cases, and believe me, when he was a defendant, they were going after him with a fury that was utterly disgusting.
Right.
In this case, now he's trying to play catch-up. And, my own instinct about this is that the definition of prosecutorial discretion means that there are cases where you think you do have a situation in which there is liability, and in order to make sure that the so-called optics and the whole operation of the Justice Department doesn't fall to pieces, what you do is you decide not to prosecute. And what Trump always does, nothing is ever in a half measure. But this is not just a guy who on one occasion committed this kind of perjury and so forth. This is a man who's one of the most evil people on the face of the earth. And you did mention, I think, with the requisite degree of irony, that everybody who brings prosecution against somebody else always says that nobody is above the law, and there's only one exception to that.
Trump.
That's the people who bring in the prosecution. And so what you do is you sit here with a kind of a pit in your stomach. And the reason I'm unhappy about being here, much as I love you, Dan, is as far as I can see, a plague on both your houses is essentially the appropriate action. He deserves to be punished, I think, given what you have said. It holds up. And Trump deserves not to bring the particular case. And so there you sit. But what's going to happen, of course, is the collateral consequences are going to dominate this. My guess is that there will now be a crusade to make Jim Comey into some kind of a public hero.
Right.
Just as they try to do with everybody else in this sort of kind of affair. What the president has to do is separate his political resentments, all of which are justified, from his official duties, and care more about the structure and the integrity of the department than all of this that's going on. It's not as though when you put Kash Patel on this particular thing, you're getting a neutral FBI head. You're getting somebody who's everybody's part of it.
Yeah, but there's nothing. This is like one of these. This is unicorn stuff. The neutral FBI head, neutral prosecutors. It's like neutral media. There's no such thing. Those words are thrown around like they actually apply to someone, and they don't. The question is whether you're fair-minded. You definitely have political perspectives. Everybody has political perspectives. Jim Comey has political perspectives, clearly. But it's how you go about carrying out, fulfilling the duties of your particular job or your charge. That's the matter. And I guess my point, you've answered the question in terms of why not do this. And I take that. I think we've talked about this a long time in terms of the lawfare that was perpetuated against Trump is going to boomerang and be revisited on the left. And we're going down a dangerous road. This is almost inevitable. But the flip side is to say to those who want, if there's a credible case to make and no one's above the law as a standard, then you're gosh darn right Jim Comey should be prosecuted. And if you want to accuse us of retributory lawfare, then go ahead. Because if we don't do this, then it's going to send a signal to the left that they can do the kind of things they did against Trump and basically all kinds of Trump associates during Russian collusion, put them through the process, the punishment being the process, put them through that, bankrupt them. They can do that with impunity. And when a Republican gets controls of the reins of powers and appoints his or her attorney general, then when it comes to any sort of accountability, they will always show up to this, knife fight with a handshake. And so what do you say to that?
Well, I'm going to try to say this. I do disagree with about one thing. I think when you talk about recent heads of the FBI, what you're saying is true. But I think if you go back to William Webster and Louis Freeh and so forth, the professionalism much dominated the current type of situation.
Yeah.
Because Webster was regarded as a kind of a folk hero on the part of everybody who knew him, because he seemed in very sensitive positions to have kept the kind of integrity that we expect to have out of our public officials. So the one modification I would give to your statement is I don't think you're wrong. I think what the correct situation is that the estimation of the FBI has gone down because of the politicization of the office. Now, you're making a very powerful point, okay? And it's one that is constantly fought. You have bad motivation for bringing a valid case. Do you worry about the motivation, or do you worry about the case? Mm-hmm. And you're making a powerful argument. Well, you got to worry about the particular case. Otherwise, what happens, there's going to be a fatal asymmetry. And look, just the other day, if you recall, the Google guy wrote a letter saying, of course Joe Biden pressured us for all these vaccine cases. And what made that one particularly horrible is when they did try to bring a lawsuit about it, the Supreme Court said, none of you guys have standing to talk about one of the great scandals of our particular time, even though you were all hurt by it. And so what's going on here, we're just keeping score. And there's one miscarriage after another. And it's certainly, let me put it to this way. If he does bring this case and the evidence bears it out, then a jury is going to be bound to convict Comey of what's going on. Now, he professes his particular innocence. He's allowed to do that. But if you'll note, he never addressed the question of did he have any relationship with David Richmond, who was a cousin, obviously, guy on the other side of this situation. And I think it's been pretty well known that he talked to that guy all the time. But the fly in the ointment is going to be, did he talk about him to urge him on to explain what happened, or did he release classified information? And if it's simply the form of talking to him, the case is going to be a bit more difficult, but still it could be perjury if what you said is I never talked to him at all, and what you did is you talked to him about non-classified information. And so this is going to be a hornet's nest, and I think in the end, unfortunately, if the case is there, and they want to bring it, there's nothing you could do to say that this is an abuse of prosecutorial discretion. Be overjoyed about the fact that you can get even with your enemy by proving the case that is valid as a matter of fact in law. That's the situation that we have. Now, the Trump blue boards, what they're going to do is come out, well, he was guilty of everything that they charged him early on, which is absurd. I mean, the way in which they treated him in those cases and their fake conviction, Miss Letitia James, she comes upon and says, he's defrauded the bank. The bank doesn't want the money. I'll take it. So you owe me $400 million for doing reputable transactions. I mean, if this had done to me, I'd be scarred for life. And I'm afraid that Trump is. And one of the things that the American left did is they made him a much more vengeful president in his second term than he was in his first term. And there are going to be a lot of innocent people that are going to get caught in the crossfire as he starts going after them. My guess is what Adam Schiff did will probably contain elements of falsehood, maybe not perjury and so forth, but serious stuff. And everybody who's involved with the Hunter Biden situation, it's going to be serious stuff. I don't know whether they have enough to get Clapper and Brennan. What I do know is what you know. They're going after him.
Well, I'll tell you, there may be some people that are not guilty under criminal law, the available criminal law, but I don't think there's anybody on his hit list that you can properly describe as innocent. You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, that's the tragedy. Look, when I went through all of this, but make it very clear, I don't want criminal prosecutions because of their collateral consequences. But when it came to Trump, every time they were after him, I rose to the extent that I could, even on your show,
yes,
in his defense, right? And I mean, I'm trying to be a consistent person. But what I'm doing is saying how I would act. But I cannot tell a prosecutor has a strong case. He can't do it to get revenge because the motive is irrelevant if the case is strong as a matter of law. And then we use that other funny word, optics. And we don't know how this is going to start to play out. We don't know what's going to go on in these cases. And one other point that I do want to make is you were certainly right that the decision of the Eastern District of Virginia probably was one that was highly contentious both ways around, which only adds confusion and fuel to this most unhappy but very vibrant fiber.
Professor Richard Epstein, James Parker Hall, Distinguished Service Professor, Emeritus of Law, and Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago. Professor Epstein, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Oh, I always enjoyed to be with you. Bye-bye, Dan.
Bye. And Professor Epstein joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
President Trump has made some pretty amazing claims since he's taken his seat as president. He's delivering on what he promised. On Inauguration Day, Trump's very first declaration was,
"The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish."
Consider this. Since the election, gold has shot up hundreds of dollars per ounce, shattering all-time record highs. Fox Valley Coins does not pretend to know the future, but they do know that if you're buying or selling gold or silver, they are the place to do it. These are some of the top reasons people choose a dealer. You want a national dealer with a local presence you can deal with face-to-face. You want a large selection, the best prices, and great service. You want to walk in with cash and walk out with the best product. You want to deal with legacy dealers with integrity. Whether buying or selling, or just one valuation, Fox Valley Coin